Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Circling Shell Sports on Converge Media. I am your host, as always, Charles Hamaker. Today we have an interesting recording day, simply because, not to skip the Seahawks or anything at this point, but today is November 29th. The deadline it's being treated as a deadline of sorts these next 2 days, because December 1st is when the MLB lockout is expected to start. And free agency is going to be going a little bit crazy. So we might get developing news as we're going here. That would certainly be something interesting. I'll keep you updated if we get anything. I've got something tuned into it if something occurs. But with that being said, we're going to go with the normal show as we do. And if something happens, I'll keep you updated, no matter if it takes place during a different team segment. With that being said, we're going to jump into our Seahawks here, who have not played yet. They still have yet to play. They will start at 5:30 tonight at the Washington football team on the road. Monday Night Football. Still a big game, considering that if the Seahawks are able to win this game and improve to 4-7, they will still be only one game out of a wild card spot, wildly enough. But yes, that game is still yet to take place, considering we recorded this earlier in the day on Monday. That's still a big game. I mean, technically, with the way things are, you could still scratch out a playoff spot. Unlikely, yes. The Seahawks have only been given a 5% chance to make the playoffs, considering their current point of the season, where they're at in the standings, where their record is, and in the division that they're playing in. But at the end of the day, if you're only one game out of a playoff spot, the odds don't matter. You just focus on what's coming ahead for you. And the Seahawks will have to do that against a Washington football team that really is kind of finding their groove as of late. They're getting some playmakers back in Curtis Samuel and Logan Thomas. Their defense is playing better, sort of to the level that people were expecting them to be this offseason. So it's not going to be an easy game, with that being said. So outside of that, we don't really have I don't have stat leaders for you. I don't have a game recap to go over. I do have injury news for you, though. November 28th, it was announced that the following players were deemed out prior to the game happening. So these guys are just going to be out already. It was deemed running back Rashad Penny and running back Travis Homer are out for this game, leaving the Seahawks shorthanded at running back. Left guard Damian Lewis is out, a big piece on the offensive line. Offensive tackle Jamarco Jones, who has played well in Dwayne Brown's absence. Dwayne Brown's back, though. Jamarco Jones is out for this game, and cornerback Trey Brown is out as well. It was announced on the 23rd that Trey Brown had successful knee surgery and will be out for the year. So a young piece there goes down for the year. Really frustrating. I think we talked about this last week, with all the things that's going on with, the way that this team's losing games and playing in this tough division, to add injuries on top of that to key contributors it's just the perfect storm for Seattle, really. But those are the injury notes for you prior to the game against Washington on the road on Monday Night Football. And team-related notes, after the loss last week, Pete Carroll is reportedly open to changes to the team's philosophy. On November 23rd, Carroll said that he is open to subtle changes in the Seahawks' philosophy following the team's rough start to the season. So that's kind of an interesting little tidbit to note there, simply because for the longest time, Carroll has always been a guy who seemed to stick to his guns, stick to the way he does things, and just no changes really at all. Obviously, subtle changes is still relatively minor, but it'll be something to see whether or not that actually shows on the field tonight against Washington in prime time. Also, with that, speaking of prime time, Week 13 matchup against the 49ers after this game has been flexed out of prime time in favor of the Kansas City versus Denver game. And then November 29th, running back Josh Johnson and cornerback Kevin Heslop were both elevated from the practice squad to help out with the backfield and secondary, considering the injuries that we talked about to the running backs and having Trey Brown out for the season. In league-related notes, the NFL could face subpoenas and hearings. This goes back to the Washington football team scandal that we talked about a few weeks ago. By not providing documents that were related to the probe into the team, the United States Congress could potentially take actions further to get more into that, because now that's a big deal, because the probe into the Washington football team took place, and then basically nothing came up. There was no evidence that was presented. It was just like, okay, it's done. There was no further look into that, and that's a little suspicious. So we could hear more about that. That's a big scandal Coincidentally enough, Seahawks are playing them this week. Continuing with the league news, the Los Angeles Rams settled a lawsuit with St. Louis. The NFL and Rams owner Stan Kroenke reportedly reached a $790 million relocation settlement with the city of St. Louis. And then 38.5 million people watched the Raiders versus Cowboys game on Thanksgiving. CBS said that the game was the most watched NFL regular season game on any network since 1990. That's a big deal for a big game on Thanksgiving there. So to just wrap up Seahawks here in the NFL, the record still sits at 3-7. That could change here in a few hours. Setting fourth in the NFC West, and will still be in fourth in the NFC West, considering that the Niners, who are just one ring above Seattle, won their game. So you're in the two-game hole. Fourth NFC West, looking ahead after the game against Washington later today, Seattle will come back home to play the San Francisco 49ers with a 1:25 p.m. Pacific time kickoff. Okay, here's the big one. This is the big one I'm focused on right now. The Seattle Mariners are in their offseason currently. For the longest time, we'd look on them, and their upcoming thing in my notes would be free agency. And Seattle's been relatively quiet until the last few days. So looking into that changed on the 28th here, November 28th. The Mariners traded for second baseman / outfielder Adam Frazier. Frazier was acquired in exchange for relief pitcher Ray Kerr and outfielder Corey Rozier. Rozier was the 11th pick in the 2021 draft for Seattle. This is a big a big piece to acquire. It's not ultimately who you want to put at second base full time, I don't believe, but he's somebody who certainly will help the lineup day in and day out, and certainly can fill into that DH spot when he's not playing in the field. Frazier was an all-star last season after being acquired. He played half the season with the Pirates and half the season with the Padres. He had a 305 average on the season, only 5 home runs. So he's more of a contact guy, more of a base hit guy, not really hit for power. 43 RBIs, 10 stolen bases, and a 7.79 OPS. Dipoto said that acquiring Frazier would not stop the team from adding another infielder. So this means that, essentially you're getting another bench bat to an extent. He's kind of like bench bat premium because he can, fill into that DH spot, can play some second base when needed to, can play in the outfield as well. So a versatile piece there, and one that can act. It's a good bat you're acquiring. And it's interesting because, Dipoto is saying that this won't hinder Seattle from adding another infielder. You're still technically, the way you look at it, you got second base and third base are kind of where you need to look at. Third base, you're looking at maybe Chris Bryant, Trevor Story's available, Javier Baez. Those sort of guys can slot into the second base, third base kind of role. Those three, Chris Bryant, Trevor Story, Javier Baez, those three still looking for a team. Carlos Correa is still looking for a team, but Correa is more of a reach to look at. And it's not necessarily put in stone that he won't re-sign with Houston, but with the way things are going, it's kind of unlikely. So Adam Frazier, that's a big deal. Acquiring him was big. November 28th, Seattle was eyeing Chris Bryant. The team was one of the many interests in the free agent who is not expected to sign before December 1st when the big MLB lockout takes place, but things can change. The Mariners lost out on pitcher Kevin Gausman and shortstop / second baseman Marcus Semien. Gausman would sign a 5-year, $110 million deal with the Toronto Blue Jays. Gausman had been tied to Seattle, and it was reported that Seattle had made a strong push for Gausman in the hours prior to him signing with Toronto. Just not the case there. It was also interesting because Gausman was reportedly looking to play for a team on the West Coast, and instead he goes to Canada. And then Marcus Semien, a guy that was basically labeled as the cover boy for the Mariners free agency this upcoming season, a guy that many thought would be a make-or-break player for the Mariners to sign this offseason to really cement their status for next year. Signed a 7-year, $175 million deal with the Texas Rangers. The Rangers, if you don't recall, were last in the division this past season. So for them to make a splash move like this is certainly an interesting one. As I mentioned, Semien was deemed the face of free agency for the Mariners this upcoming season, and almost seemed like they were, tied at the hand there. and obviously didn't happen. From what I understand and from what I read, Simeon was offered a 5-year deal from the Mariners, and getting those extra 2 years with the Rangers, getting that extra money is more than likely what pushed it over the edge there. And then November 29th, to move on from the loss out on Simeon, just about 30 minutes ago, actually, the Mariners signed left-handed pitcher Robbie Ray to a 5-year, $115 million deal, pending a physical. He is on the way to Seattle now to complete that physical. It would be the largest free agency signing under Jerry Dipoto. His stats last year, a 13-win, 7-loss record with a 2.84 ERA, 193.1 innings pitched, 248 strikeouts, and a 1.04 WHIP. So for those who aren't really too enveloped and involved in the stats for baseball, this one award will just tell you all you need to know about Robbie Ray this past season. He won the American League Cy Young Award, which is effectively given out to the best pitcher per conference. They have an American League winner and a National League winner. So Robbie Ray won that award this past season for the American League. An instant impact player for the Mariners. I know that Seattle coming into free agency wanted to sign 2 pitchers, so there's one. Still looking at another, potentially a guy like Marcus Stroman, a younger option there, someone that you could bring in. You could bring in a James Paxton, but I know a lot of Seattle fans are looking for another big free agency splash. But signing Robbie Ray is a big deal and will help Seattle going forward. Just looking back at last year with having all the bullpen days, having to use your bullpen as a start day is something that you shouldn't have done anyway. That's a big deal. And considering it's not obviously just a 1-year one and done like it was with Toronto, 5 years, you're locking up a solid pitcher for 5 years. That's a big deal if you want to contend going forward. You want to be a force in the future here in the AL West. And the AL West is heating up. The AL West has made a ton of moves around the division. It's not going to be any easier necessarily, but you're really loading up and stockpiling, and that's a big deal, and that's important. So like I said, if something else happens, I will update it. But at the current moment, right now, we've got Robbie Ray is the most recent news, and that was 30 minutes. That's still kind of cooling off. We're going to let that simmer there. And league notes, got one league note for you, was just free agency coming to a halt potentially. Free agency is supposed to stop December 1st when the MLB owners begin an expected lockout. So that could hinder some things, and hopefully that doesn't affect the actual season itself, because it has happened in the past. So just hoping that the lockout doesn't move anything around and affect anything, and that it would be great if you could just bypass the lockout all out and just avoid it. Not always the case. So upcoming free agency, still in free agency, winter meetings. It's all a big deal, and will all shape the Mariners product that you see on the field this upcoming season. Heading into Sounders here. Tough game. November 23rd versus Real Salt Lake at home in the first round of the MLS Cup playoffs. Seattle would lose that game 6-5 in penalty kicks. Seattle season ends as they put up 21 shots, 3 on goal, as compared to 0 all game for RSL. Think about that. Soccer's, I wouldn't say funny. Soccer is a game like that where you can put up 21 shots, 3 on the goalie. Your opponent can put up 0 all game, and in a cruel way, really, you can still lose that game in penalty kicks. I mean, the first 5 penalty kicks all went in, putting us into sudden death penalty kicks. Seattle would have theirs saved, and then the next resulting penalty kick would go through in an even more brutal fashion, as Stephen Fry saved the penalty kick, but it went off of one of the posts and then rolled along the goal line and then into the goal. Truly brutal stuff. I mean, as being there, covering that game, and such a tight game, 120 minutes, no score, no goal, not even relatively, not even a close shot, a dangerous shot on goal all game. And to have penalty kicks, go into penalty kicks, deal with those nerves, and then to see the ball get saved by Fry, hit the post, and then roll along the line and go into the goal. Just a brutal way to end a season that really was a triumphant one for Seattle to start out with so many injuries in the early part of the season, deal with losing players to international break, and still have the best start in franchise history, and not go ever below 4th place in the Western Conference is pretty impressive to do that. And it's one of the more impressive, not if not the most impressive feat of Brian Schmetzer's career as coach of the Sounders. But ultimately, it's a tough way to end a good season, and I know that this group will just build on that. It's just absolutely brutal, really. So no injury news for you, no team notes. League-related notes, Bob Bradley was hired by Toronto FC less than a week after being fired. Bradley finds a new job. The notable part of that is that after Seattle beat LAFC, who was then coached by Bob Bradley at the time, lost to Seattle in the Western Conference Finals. Brian Schmetzer was asked how he felt, which is a relatively bland question in journalism here. Schmetzer recalled being better than Bob, so that'll always be a memory in Seattle sports history. And Real Salt Lake, who beat Seattle, advances to play the Portland Timbers in the Western Conference Final, which is kind of a kick in the gut, just because your arch rival is playing the team that beat you in the Western Conference Finals. One of those teams gets to go to the MLS Cup. So with that being said, next week for you, we'll have a season recap for the Sounders, sort of wrap that season up and just look back at everything, which again, impressive season to go through all those injuries and to deal with losing players to international break. With that being said, too, next year the season's starting early, starting in February on the 27th against Real Salt Lake, and has to end in mid-November because of the World Cup. So all of this past season is just building up to next year, which is a big deal. No Storm news for you, still relatively quiet. Heading into our Seattle Kraken here, over the past week, did not get any easier for Seattle. They played the Carolina Hurricanes, who were tied for the second best record in the league. Seattle would win that game at home 2-1, thanks to our player of the game, left winger Marcus Johansson, scoring 1 goal, 1 point, 1 plus minus with 2 shots on goal, scoring that late into the game against the Tampa Bay Lightning, who are the two-time the back-to-back defending champions in the NHL. Seattle would lose that game on the road 3-0. Just kind of a game that was a funk and relatively frustrating. And then November 27th against the Florida Panthers on the road, the team with the most points and the best record in the league, Seattle would win that game 4-1. Player of the game would be defenseman Jamie Alexiak, 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points, a 3 plus minus, 3 hits, 3 blocks, and 1 takeaway. Seattle would stop the Panthers' home win streak at 11 and get a huge win. Think about that. Seattle in their past 4 games have played 2 of the teams that were second and third in the league with total points and best record. They played the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions on the road. That game was a loss. Those first 2 were wins. And then playing the team with the number 1 record in the league and beating them 4-1 in their own building. That's a big stretch. Considering that where we have been in past weeks, where I've kind of had to say, hey, I know it's tough losing these games. I know it's tough being blown out 7-3 by Colorado in your own barn. But these past 4 games have been great. They've been clicking. They've been what I've been talking about. The defense has been playing their role. The goalkeepers, Philip Grubauer and Chris Drieger, have been doing their job with great defense in front of them. And Seattle's been going on the power play. At some point in the past few games, I believe that streak has ended. Seattle had a power play goal in 5 consecutive games. That, after being worst in the league in power play goals and power play percentage, is a big step up, and you're seeing the turn here right now. Obviously, that still has to continue. 4 games out of the 82 that the team plays is a minor stretch, obviously, in the grand scheme of things. But it's a big deal considering where you want this team to be and getting the chemistry up, because you're going to look at these wins later on in the season and say, hey, these were going to be building blocks. These are where Seattle really turned it around and really put the right foot forward. So that's a big deal there. In injury-related news, we do have some injury news for you. November 24th, forward Mason Appleton was activated off of IR. Forward Nathan Bastion was placed on waivers. November 25th, Bastion claimed off of waivers by the New Jersey Devils. So one of the early players for the Kraken claimed off waivers there. November 26th, in the game against Tampa Bay, Mark Giordano, the captain, was not able to play this game due to COVID protocols. And then November 27th, team recalled forward Riley Sheehan from Charlotte, which was easy because, they needed Charlotte they needed Sheehan for that game against the Panthers and probably didn't have to take too far of a trip there. The one piece of news I mentioned I might stop this. Corey Seager was given a 10-year mega deal with the Texas Rangers, $325 million. That's a lot of money. He was one of the guys who was kind of a long shot for the Mariners, so he's off the board there. Continuing on with NHL. In league-related news, on November 28th, the Montreal Canadiens would fire their general manager, Mark Bergevin. Bergevin was out in Montreal as part of their own front office shakeup. Evander Kane, who we talked about a few weeks ago, the San Jose Sharks would waive Evander Kane. The troubled skater is currently facing a 21-game suspension for using a fake vaccine card and will be sent to the AHL, which is the NHL's minor league affiliate, if unclaimed. So Evander Kane, I mean, all I need to tell you is fake vaccine card, and that's kind of tells you the interesting story he had. There's more to it there. If you get time, Evander Kane has had a interesting career with a lot of controversy, but fake vaccine card, all I need to tell you. So the Kraken record now sits at 7 wins, 13 losses, and 1 overtime loss, giving them 13 points. They're 7th in the Pacific Division now. So Vancouver takes over 8th. Vancouver's at the bottom of the barrel. We're at 7th. Yay. So looking ahead, the team plays November 29th tonight at the Buffalo Sabres with a 4 p.m. Pacific time puck drop. December 1st at the Detroit Red Wings with a 4:30 Pacific time puck drop. And December 3rd versus the Edmonton Oilers, coming back to play the Oilers with Connor McDavid and Leon Stadel at 7 p.m. Pacific time. Some big games. It doesn't get easier. Edmonton's got some really talented players, some of the best skaters in the world. And just like I was saying, hoping that these can be building blocks that we look at moving forward. And then, as I've mentioned, next week we'll have the Reign recap. So we've got Sounders and Reign coming up next week, 2 soccer recaps. Outside of that, obviously the Reign didn't play a game, so there's no direct news from them. But there is NWSL news. I apologize for that. The Chicago Red Stars are the newest of the NWSL teams to have a scandal. November 22nd, it was announced right after the NWSL championship loss that Chicago lost to the Washington Spirit that head coach of 11 years, Rory Dames, resigned following the championship loss. It's reported that Dames has allegations of emotional abuse. 7 players came forward to the Washington Post stating that Dames regularly berated and emotionally abused players and sought inappropriate relationships with some. U.S. Soccer was told of these relations and effectively turned a blind eye, saying that the abuse was expected behavior of a professional coach. And November 27th, the Red Stars ownership put out a statement saying that they were deeply sorry amid the allegations of abuse against the former head coach. With that being said, with all the stuff that's happened in NWSL that we've gone over, the one thing to say about that is good that these coaches are being pushed out. It's good seeing that the players in this league are really taking charge, making it a player-driven league and getting, effectively the scum out of the league. Obviously, it's not great that these things are happening in the league, but to have it be removed is the first step. So with that being said, keep you updated on that going forward. Seahawks play tonight at 5:30. The Mariners still in the loop. I don't have anything current of you. The last piece of information that came out was the Corey Seager news. So not getting a Seager back in Seattle. The Sounders season recap coming for you next week after a tough loss in the first round of the playoffs, the first time in the MLS that Seattle has not made the second round of the playoffs. The Storm still quiet, and the Kraken winning 3 of their last 4, 3 of them being against the top 3 teams in the league. And the Reign season recap coming for you next week. As always, thank you, directors. Salman, as always, best in the business. We will see you on by the time this comes out, and next week, it'll be December. We're already in December. That's pretty crazy to me. December 6th, we'll see you next. So we could November 23rd to 29th done, December 6th news. We will more than likely have more free agency for you to go over. With that being said, I am your host, as always, Charles Hamlicker. Until then, be well, take care of yourself.